we have another video here. Welcome, all the people that are watching this clipped out on YouTube. We got another video here from Pilgrims past. This was recommended to me in our Discord. You can join the link below if you'd like. Yeah. A video of why 40k triggers people from 4 months ago. 40k is inherently anti-progressive. They have a comment saying stuff at the bottom.
40k universe is inherently anti-progressive. Now I'd like to clarify that this isn't meant to be a simple culture war video where I complain about what's happening with the beloved franchise. Although it kind of is, since 40k is the current prize for one of the more recent battles all over social media. So touching a bit on that aspect is inevitable. But my purpose with this video is to go beyond pop politics.
Oh, that'll be fun.
I'll attempt to analyze a theory of history and perhaps some political philosophy within the world-building context of the 40k galaxy as it is presented. And in so doing, I hope to generate a conversation about the idea of progress. You see, progress, both social and technological, is naturally inhibited by the very nature of the Warhammer universe. The 40k setting operates more on cycles, where humanity rises to fall, then rises again, and falls again. Like in this quote. The technological marvels upon which its dominion of the galaxy is founded are long gone. No man now knows how many times humanity has soared to the lofty heights of achievement only to plummet once more to the depths of barbarity. The science that caused both advancement and debasement is now the subject of superstition and fear. Dark Heresy Guidebook, page 15, I think. And who can forget this incredible quote that defines the entire setting? Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim dark future there is only war. There is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. This idea stands in stark contrast to the Whig theory of history, which is more common in our era. It's the one most normies believe in, and what's presented in seminal science fiction like Star Trek, where history is seen as a series of steps towards a better future. Things are always getting better in the long run, from cavemen to rocket ships, and from slavery and human sacrifice to...
Damn, AI art. That hurts.
Universal human rights. But here, 40,000 years in the future, we still have slaves, and human sacrifice. But in space! And we also have primitive cavemen flying in rocket ships for good measure, depending on which world the character hails from.
Damn. Is half this video AI
In the
generated?
Whig theory of history, the bringer of change becomes the protagonist of history, because history only moves forward to better eras and never regresses to harsher conditions. Therefore, those who bring social change are not seen with that much hostility, because if it's bad change, history would naturally purge it. In fact, it's people advocating for a conservative or traditional approach that are seen as suspicious a lot of the time. Because if newer is always better for everyone, then seeking to preserve the past is interpreted as inherently unjust or oppressive to one group or another. It's one of the reasons why the word fascist is thrown around a lot. But in 40k, social change becomes dangerous because it's more likely something caused by the entropy of the universe. Here, personified by paranormal Reddit mods, the four gods of chaos. So the right side of history is not getting purged, for heresy. Civilization is always at the edge of collapse because its own existence isn't guaranteed. So progress...
I think he's just describing grimdark so far. It's not really anything. He's just like describing the tantamount fundamental things of grimdark, which you can see if you go on my channel. I have a video called What is Grimdark and How It Keeps Me Away from the 40k universe. Because my main gripe with grimdark is that it's just the stagnation part of it. I think it's just boring, especially when you have something like the fact that the Imperium lasts 10,000 years between Horus Heresy and like the modern 40k, and basically nothing happens. It really makes them feel a lot more incompetent. Like, I know it's like part of the jokes that the Imperium is incompetent and stuff like that, and how like they're so depraved, but like fatal. Yeah, exactly. It's like a defeatist, a nihilistic viewpoint. But like, it hurts because it's like, it's just, to me, it's bad world building. Like, it sounds good on paper. Like, this Imperium has lasted 10,000 years, and it hasn't changed at all in that whole time. But, like, from a writing standpoint, like, from, like, characters and narratives that you're supposed to, like, kind of get invested in, It works better as like the satire side of 40K or like the grand theological side of 40K where there's no concrete characters or anything to follow. But as soon as you start having like Space Marines or Primarchs and stuff that you're supposed to follow throughout the ages, or like they were around in the Horus Heresy and now they're around, it's like, it's just, it hurts the narrative because you're telling me 10,000, you know how long 10,000 years ago is, or 10,000 years in general is? 10,000 years, that's fucking, what, 8,000 BCE? That was around when the pyramids got built. Like, think about how much humanity has changed from pyramids to now. That's a long ass time. 10,000 years ago, we still had mammoths on Earth. Like, it is such a incomprehensible period of time because it's not just like 1,000 years is incomprehensible already. 1,000 years ago is what? 1,000 AD? We had fucking crusades. We were in the Dark Ages then. People didn't even know how to draw in three-dimensional perspectives. Now, 200 years ago, we had the telephone. We went from like literal wooden boats with sails to landing on the moon within 200 years. Like 10,000 years. I get that it's like the technology is limited. Around 4,000 years? No. They're way older than that, I believe. Maybe I'm off on that. Or maybe it's not the pyramids I'm thinking about, but there are structures from 8,000 BC. Because I think 12,000 is the oldest, right? Machu Picchu? Not Machu Picchu. What the fuck am I saying? That's so incorrect. I forget what it's called, but it's the site in Turkey. That's like 12,000 years old. Maybe it's not the pyramids. Maybe it's other stuff in Egypt that I'm forgetting about. But either way, it's a long fucking time ago, right? And it's like one of the things that makes, like, it is one of the most unrealistic parts. Because even if like technology has been forgotten and stuff, 10,000 years, and only in the last 200 years of like the Warhammer timeline, that the Easter head, I don't know how old those are, the Easter Island statues, but the only in the last like Göbekli Tepe, yeah, about 10,000. Okay, like it's only in like the last 200 years or so of the timeline of 40K that like Primaris and stuff has started to come around. So it took them 10,000 years to slightly upgrade their armor. And it's not the fact that like stagnation is just like an inevitability, Like they say like technology has been lost, but like what the fuck does that mean? You mean like that even the members of the Mechanicus are just stupid? Like it's boring narratively. Because it's like, what do you mean they haven't done anything? Nothing at all. Like, come on. It's like, it sounds good on paper. For like a big theological dramatic thing, it sounds really, really good and you write it out like that. But like, when you try to think about it practically, which you can't do because it's Warhammer, I understand that. Like, you can't get too... you can't think about Warhammer too practically, and that's why it works better as a satire than like a real... honest thing. But at that same point, it's like, well, now why do I care about the narrative when the narrative is weaker when it tries to be a narrative? We shouldn't mess with this tech we never heard of, so don't fuck with it. It's not like never heard of, it's not like they don't know how. So it's like they have machines in the Mechanicus that they don't know how to turn on or replicate, which I don't know. I feel like if you had scientists take apart a toaster, they could figure out how to turn the toaster back on. I don't know. None of their technology seems that complex for it to make sense for them to not be able to reverse engineer it unless they're entirely stupid or like they just say, oh, we can't do it. Like it's just like it hurts it narratively, in my opinion. And I think it makes it feel... When you try to get grimdark and you try to get realistic about it, it makes it worse in that aspect, in my opinion. Mecha boys find robots and repurpose them? I mean, yeah, but orcs just slap stuff together with duct tape and dreams, and Gork and Mork make it happen.
this would be much less so. Therefore, in this scenario, the trads win. There's more to lose by risking change than maintaining tradition, as the cult mechanicus is well aware. Keep in mind, however, that progressivism isn't exclusively a political issue. The progressive versus conservative thing is mostly pop politics for the American context. In political theory, progressivism is the belief that history cannot or should not ever move backwards, that we're always moving to newer, unprecedented historical eras, where we're developing something new. Both right-wing and left-wing ideologies can either be progressive or rejected, like anarcho-primitivism, which is a left-wing ideology that believes we should basically return to the Stone Age, because only then we'll all be equal, but in the mud. And the Futurist Party, in Italy, merged with fascism and moved very much to the right. Both the left-wing and the right-wing iteration of progressivism is explored in 40K, and both fail rather miserably. My point is that the grim dark universe of 40K is hostile to both left-wing progressive values and right-wing progressive values, which I'll elaborate on in a bit. Anyway, Warhammer 40K portrays a universe where the natural state of life is war.
Why are you using clips from Age of Sigmar? This is another really small critique thing, but Age of Sigmar isn't really grimdark. It's kind of more like dark fantasy. So it's a really weird 40K centrist. I mean, yeah, it's but also the ideas of progressivism in a civilization standpoint that you would use for 40K is not necessarily how you would define progressives in a modern contemporary context. So it's you're just sort of transcribing words in different contexts that don't mean the same thing, and you can't just plop one from one setting and move it to the other and it mean the same thing. That's why context is important, and the way we use words is also important.
And peace is the result of order imposed by an artificial state, preferably governed by a powerful sovereign, like what Thomas Hobbes says, which makes stability more important than progress. The Imperium of Man is famous for being over the top, with its hellish hive worlds covered in factory pollution and non-stop acid rain. And of course we can't forget its massive military of billions of disposable soldiers thrown into an endless cosmic meat grinder and ginormous genetically enhanced super soldiers fighting furries. I'm not even kidding. 40K is so insane that the Flash Gets parody animation fits perfectly with canon. But again, what you have to understand when it comes to the absurdity of the Imperium of Man is that its nature is a direct result of its setting. Humans and Eldar tried other models of galactic civilization and it always crumbled under the weight of the universe. Why? Because of the very nature of reality. When this universe began to form, one of the first things to emerge were the Citan, that feed off of stars and planets to exist. This principle that to live you must devour something else is the core of life. Then, when the Old Ones become the first interstellar civilization, they formed a temporary paradise where they lived forever and went around seeding life on various planets until another civilization, called the Necrontyr, went to war against them because they were born in a crappy planet and had to fight for a better existence. Which leads to the paradise that the Old Ones built for themselves being wiped out after the Necrontyr joined forces with the ever-hungry Citan. The historical eras of the galaxy change after catastrophes caused by the inherent evolutionary hunger that drives living organisms. Whether for pleasure, improvement of circumstances, or just plain old animal instinct to devour. Once the previous era collapses, the cycle begins again. This is a running theme in this universe. The Star Trek-like technologically progressive human civilization that first spread to the stars in the dark age of technology was destroyed because of unfettered technological progress, which made humanity build artificial intelligent systems it couldn't control. The Eldar created a post-scarcity society of a pleasure paradise, which made them so sexually depraved and degenerate that the entire civilization collapsed. And billions of their people died horrific deaths as their souls were consumed by the manifestation of their excess. Because the Chaos Gods in general are always beyond the veil of material reality and seeking to tempt mortals into dysfunctional pathological behavior that they can use to control and possess the souls of those of weak faith. And the Tyranids represent the relentless hunger of nature, since they're biological intergalactic predators that seeks to devour all biomass in the Milky Way. But they also use gene-stealer cults that infiltrate human society to prepare planets for invasion. This is not a universe that rewards the mainstream progressive values of diversity, equity, and inclusion of an open society inspired by Karl Popper.
Just say. I like how he had to get DEI in there. He's just describing what grimdark is in a really, really roundabout way. I just love it. He had to get DEI in there. He had to make sure it's anti-DAI, which is not. I don't know. It's just stupid.
and associated with the American left. And it also does not reward the small government limited by individual rights, freedom of speech, and pursuit of happiness, like in a liberal society inspired by John Locke, associated with the American right. And I mean the original definition of liberal.
Did you just say freedom of speech and pursuit of happiness is like a right-wing idea? Okay.
Yeah. And this is because all that just gives room for aliens and demons to subvert your society from the inside out. Instead, this universe rewards hierarchy, cohesion, and exclusion, as well as intense discipline. And by reward, I mean you get to keep existing in this bleak reality. In any case, if the Imperium of Man starts having gender affirmative action quotas for the castrated, muscle-bound murder machines of the Space Marines, it'll feel...
So they don't have gender quotas. There are just female custodies. They're not doing it because DEI, they're doing it because they're just women. Like, I hate the argument. I hate the custodies argument so much.
Very out of place and very forced. The Tau faction is the closest thing.
What do you mean it's out of place that there's women? That's what your argument is. It's out of place because there's women. Come on. You just talked to us about gods and aliens that devour entire stars. You think women fighting on the front lines is really that much crazier? Yeah. They put guns in the hands of every single last person who can walk.
To an inclusive society in the setting. But even they have a caste system, so not very egalitarian, and their native utopian beliefs are getting crushed the more they learn about just how insane their universe is. Their plot arc is them being forced to become more brutal to survive.
For the Tau Empire, a gene stealer from High Fleet Gorgon made for a fascinating test subject. Their mistake was that after it was captured by the Earthcast, and during their substantial analysis, a worker was implanted with the germ seed. Over the following 20 years, Earthcast laboratory workers increasingly noticed many distorted anatomies throughout the labs. But this intriguing development was actually...
Hold on. I get there's not a lot of gene stealer art, but come on.
accepted as the philosophy of the greater good promotes a tolerance of alien life forms. It wasn't until a bloody schism broke out that the Firecast was brought in, and they had a hard time clearing out the extensive underground research facilities.
And as you can imagine, due to our current times, Games Workshop, the company that owns Warhammer, is in a bit of a conundrum with this fictional setting, because the corporate elites in the West adopted a progressive and egalitarian set of values, which they feel obliged to defend and spread through their platforms. But it's literally impossible to do that with 40k without destroying the entire setting, because it's completely antithetical to the very idea of progress.
How is female custodies anti-progress? How is it pro-progress? Do you consider women being on an equal footing with men progressivism? Come on. Cultures all throughout history have treated women equally. That's just, it's reactionary. It's just why is women's role in society that you have this idea for purely based on the cultural norms of society in the West? That feels very surprisingly, not surprising, but it feels very small-minded. It's that argument never makes sense to me. What?
Progress, which makes sense because left-wing progressive values are based on Rousseau's noble savage idea of nature being inherently benign and providing equally for everyone. And these axioms are precisely the opposite of the Warhammer Milky Way galaxy.
I don't want this to be another culture. Yeah, it's just a culture war video.
Putting it mildly. And it gets especially awkward when it comes to inclusivity of sexual identity. Not in the 40k universe as a whole, because...
What? Hold on, what sexual identity? What?
There's an entire faction that includes all the identities that you would want in that department. But I'm talking about how one of the writers was caught trying to shoehorn gender transitioning into the Imperium of Man.
What? As you mentioned to Typher if they disembarked from the warp ship. You told me, said the pilot. He grinned. A good name. I once knew someone who took it when they transitioned. I didn't want them to add it. Transitioned in what? What is the context of that quote? Is the word transitioned? Is the word transitioned like triggering to you? Like, do you just see the word transitioned and assume it means trans people? Because I don't know if you know this, but transitioned is a word that has a multitude of different meanings. So what is the fucking context? Because I don't know how the fuck that has to do with transitioning genders.
But it doesn't make sense because not only is this a universe where sexual activity and pleasure have to be tightly disciplined, otherwise an interdimensional literal sex...
By the way, the 40K, like the Imperium does have pleasure worlds. So like it has to be like maintained in a bit because of Slaanesh, or it can't go like too extreme, but it's like it's not like sex is forbidden.
And will infect your society with temptation and unravel it from the inside, but androgynous, non-binary sexuality is associated with decadence and societal collapse, because Slaanesh is highly associated with that. From having...
So, it's not saying that transgenderism, with Slaanesh is not the point, is transgenderism and sexual, expression is inherently degradation. Slaanesh is androgynous because they are supposed to be, like they are basically fitting to anyone's fantasies, Like the whole point is that you would thirst after them, or they would thirst after you no matter what gender you are. It's not like the whole idea of Slaanesh is in between, so therefore being trans or something it makes you evil. Like that's not what the universe is telling you. That's not what the point of Slaanesh is.
Several different pronouns to also influencing her followers into having surgical alterations to their bodies, and Slaanesh followers often become hermaphrodites.
They're not surgical. They're like just corrupted by demons. Supposed to be hypersexual. Well, yeah, it's an identity. It's not like an actual thing.
With a female breast on one side and a male chest on the other. And just look at this symbol of Slaanesh. Doesn't it remind you of something? And if you think this is awkward for Games Workshop, wait till you find out how...
I mean, I guess you could say it's representative. It doesn't look like the trans symbol. It looks more like the traditional, I don't know, one of the other ones on its own.
In Warhammer lore,
are you saying that according to Warhammer, trans people are evil?
Political elites easily fall under the sway of Slaanesh and spread her influence in their societies so that it can be destroyed by chaos. Which means that a lot of this ESG stuff and pushing this message makes GW resemble Slaaneshi cultists in their own lore. But I want to make clear that this doesn't apply to simple homosexuality though. Historically speaking, lesbianism has been typically tolerated by several hegemonic empires, and warrior cultures like Japan have had homosexuality enshrined in their books like the Hagakure, which is about obedience to your lord, and if your lord wants you to take his sword up your scabbard, you're obliged to obey.
Japan is the greatest, wonderful culture of manly love!
Hell yes, brother. Hell yes.
So the few cases
of
homosexuality that you see perfectly tolerated in the Imperium of Man, in several of the books, as outlined by Major Kill in one of his videos, is actually perfectly plausible for this kind of empire. It's the transgender surgeries and the fall of...
So how come you have to have it through a plausible lens? It's a universe that is like built on satire and built on literal demons and rat people fighting, not xenomorphs in space. Why? When you apply too much logic to it, you ruin the whole thing. None of it makes sense. You can't avoid, because if you're going to apply logic to it, you have to apply it 100%. That's why I said I don't like Grimdark. If you're going to apply logic to logically, based on empires in the past, they can't have trans people, obviously, which I don't even think is a thing. There's no trans people in 40K. But and then you're on board with the whole, it's been stagnant for 10,000 years. Come on, you can't apply logic to parts of this universe in some way, and then other parts not at all. Because there's also been empires and things in our actual past who have had people that are androgynous or transgender, not in the way that we probably think about it today, but in various ways in the past. So it's like the argument doesn't even work in that context. Until before World War II. That doesn't really narrow anything down, because before World War II was a lot.
Gender roles, which would not make any sense in the patriarchal Imperium of man, is actually perfectly plausible for this kind of empire. It's the transgender surgeries and the fall of gender roles, which would not make...
And the fall of gender roles. Do you mean that, like, there not being gender roles? Join the Sisters of Battle? I mean, I have no idea. I don't know too much about the Sisters of Battle. It would depend. I don't know any... I honestly don't know enough about the Sisters of Battle nor their recruitment process to give you an answer on that. But also, like, the Imperium doesn't even have gender roles in the conservative context. The men and women are used the same. Human lives are more expendable than the guns they wield. They're performing transgender surgeries on illegal orcs on Terra. Yeah.
any sense in the patriarchal Imperium of man.
It's not patriarchal, though. Like, there's nothing that tells us it's patriarchal. I mean, I guess there's more men in charge, but there's nothing that, like, says that it's patriarchal. It's not a thing. 1910? Okay.
It would be immediately interpreted as Slaanesh activity. I mean, if our...
So, the Imperium is patriarchal because I say so, even though women being in places of power has been a thing since the setting began. So therefore, if you have a woman in charge and the gender roles are not strictly followed to the conservative letter, you're now a Slaaneshi cultist.
Our planet existed in the Warhammer universe, with Spanish politicians eating poop, sex-crazed political staffers filming anal prawn in the American Senate building, Lolita resorts for politicians, complete with pagan temples on those islands, and whatever the fuck the Irish were doing in Eurovision.
Do you know what makes me special? I'm a queer. Woo! And I'm a witch!
We would clearly be suffering a total Slaaneshi takeover. I believe this idea of the Eldar's civilizational collapse due to Hero...
By the way, the whole thing about the Eldar and Slaanesh, it's not that they were like, you know, that one person had a threesome and that made Slaanesh a thing. It's that they had entire multitudes of planets of millions of people fucking all day, every day, while drinking out of rivers of wine and eating Nutty Buddy bars like it was no tomorrow. It's not that they were just, like, sexually deviant, it's that they were sexually unhinged. You know? Being gay is not the same as, like, literally having a planet-wide fuckfest for 100 million years. You know, or, you know, 1,000 years, however the fuck long the Eldar were getting on until... that. Doesn't queer mean questioning? Queer is just like an umbrella term to mean anything kind of LGBT. Like, it can kind of apply to a lot of different things. It could be you're just lesbian, or maybe you're gay, or maybe you are trans, or anything else. It's kind of just like a big umbrella term for that. Like, queer means what gay used to mean. You know how, like, gay kind of like was like a big umbrella term, and then it kind of transitioned into like gay as like specifically male homosexuality. Like, queer is kind of just like the big umbrella thing. Yeah. He turned this video into culture war bullshit. He didn't turn it into culture war bullshit. It was culture war bullshit from the very beginning.
Is inspired by ideas expressed by famous academics like Camille Paglia, a professor from Yale who postulates a correlation between gender ambiguity with the fall of empires.
Was that my overview of history, my noticing that in late phases, right, you all of a sudden get a proliferation of homosexuality, of sadomasochism, of gender games and impersonations and masks and so on.
By the way, this is only half of the argument. Like, people say that, like, Rome collapsed or like Athens collapsed, because as it was like getting on and it was so old and people were like progressed so far that like society began to degrade and fall apart. It was less so that, and more so that as people were becoming more progressive and finding issues with the way that their society was set up, people who were in charge of that, who were tended to be more on the conservative, traditionalist side of things, pushed back against it, and they put the blames of their society. The fucking gnat just tried to assassinate me. But they put their... Yeah, the fall of the Western narrative. Of the Western civilization narrative. But, like, it's more so that they put their blame on these people who were weird or different, because it's a lot easier to do that with a scapegoat. You know, like, people will say Athens started to fall because it became degradatious or whatever. But you have people like Socrates, who we attribute with a lot of our modern understandings of democracy and philosophy today here in the West. He was executed by the state. Now, was he executed because he was like, you know, so progressive, or like such a, you know, he was like whatever? He was executed by the state because he was corrupting the youth. Sounds familiar, right? Like that's something you've probably heard a multitude of times only in the last 10 years, if not the last 100 years, if not since forever. But that corrupting the youth was him giving lectures on how the elite political class of Athens were corrupt and rigging elections in their favor. The corruption that he spread through progressive whatever ideas was him saying, hey, we're being fucked over. And then the class that was fucking them over murdered him. Smart people like little boys. I don't know if that's supposed to be a joke, but that's like just a really fucking stupid thing to say. It's not a thing, it's a fact. Oh yeah, well it depends what you mean by the society of Greece, because like Greece is not like a singular monolithic thing. It's made up of all these different things, like you have Athens and Sparta and all these smaller empires and stuff that existed kind of in the same place around the same time. That's like saying Britain outlived Rome because the people... you know, I don't know what they were called at the time. Were they called the Britons at that point? Who lived on the English island, technically outlived Rome as an empire. You know, it changed and it transformed into something different, but technically those people outlived it, depending on how you define it. But this whole idea of like progressivism eventually leads to collapse is just not true. Greeks and Romans, well, yeah, in Greek culture it was a thing that like I forget what the name specifically is, the term for it is, but like a lot of Greek politicians and stuff would have like a steward with them who would often be a younger boy, and they would copulate. And it was, you know, very disgusting, especially by modern standards. Okay.
So I
And
believe,
this is
we're in a
kind of-
late phase. We're in a late phase of
So,
culture.
so that the proliferation of cultural identities, the proliferation of all sorts of possibilities, is actually a sign that we're
On the
towards-
verge of collapse.
Yeah.
Yes, Western culture is in the...
Greece's whole thing is taking pieces from their neighbors to adapt and change. Yeah. It's unironically the opposite, where like the more traditionalist a society gets, the faster it will collapse, because that when you put all that pressure and control on people, they obviously rebel, break out of that, and the whole thing falls apart. Because working together means compromise, means working with other people, even if you don't agree with them. If you force everyone to think like you'll get fucked up. You found the Nether Fortress? Thank God. We'll get to it next Saturday.
decline. There's absolutely no doubt about it, okay?
The West is definitely in decline, and this era will
Okay.
be the laughingstock of history. Even more so by the fact that it's painstakingly recorded by our digital devices. A lot of this crap on TikTok will be analyzed by future historians as
I think about so often, like, how cringe do you think, like, serfs in, like, medieval Europe were? Do you think there was anyone who like ever hit the gritty, like when knights were still around, and like they didn't know how universal that like thing was gonna become, but somebody just one day was like, "Father, I tire of harvesting wheat," and then he just like. Do you think that ever happened? I hope so. I wish we had like medieval TikTok. That would go so hard.
Symptoms of decline. Heck, it might even make it into their children's educational system. Like, okay, kids, as we learned from our studies of American history, if you see one of your fellow classmates dressing up like a cartoon animal and meowing like a cat, bully the shit out of that mother hugger for the sake of our glorious empire! Following this line of thought, I believe that the universe of 40K can very much be a result of the Anglosphere's subconscious. It feels like the English-speaking world coming to terms with their own decline through a fictional narrative. The parallels are definitely there, down to the rise of the suspiciously named Tao, who seem oddly Chinese. They're a rising empire challenging the hegemony of the Imperium of Man. Even though China in real life has its own problems, atheist governments have never lasted more than 100 years, and China is fast approaching that expiration date. In any case, the
China
subconscious...
is not atheist, is it? Russia never even progressed past the serf system? Yeah.
Story explanation would explain the profound skepticism of progress throughout the setting, seeing it as merely a stage before the inevitable downfall, since skepticism of the progressive view of history is getting more and more mainstream in the Anglosphere. The rise in popularity...
He just keeps describing what grimdark is, but trying to frame it in like a contemporary, fall of the Western civilization type way. But like in 40K, being super traditionalist is not helping them either, because everything still sucks. He's saying because they're not a unified religion that they're going to collapse. So he's arguing for a religious state. China is non-theist, but not necessarily atheist. Okay. I mean, I know they're not like Christian or anything, but like, come on. You tell me that all of China is atheist? What? Could they're atheist communists? Or is that like the Red Scare narrative?
Popularity of cyclical theories of history since the pandemic are a sign of this. Not only a revival of interest in Oswald Spengler, but new academics developing very interesting theories of history, like Peter Turchin in his secular cycles and cleodynamics idea. We can all feel a decline, even academia, which is saying something. Progressive idealism in general, whether left-wing or right-wing, is unsustainable in Warhammer, as we see with the Great Crusade era of 30K, when the Emperor wasn't comatose and was walking around with a golden halo around his head. In that era, the Imperium was highly progressive in its founding mythology, but it was more of a supremacist type of manifest destiny, where the people was guaranteed to march to a bright future as the rulers of an expanding territory. It's the view where the people or empire in question are special, and will be the heralds of an unprecedented new era of civilization. All other
I
civilizations...
wouldn't say manifest destiny is really a progressive idea. That's kind of just colonialism. Also fights against right-wing ideals. Well, yeah, but that's only to show that you... The only reason he brought that up is to show you that he's not biased, okay? There's no... He's looking at this from like a totally objective viewpoint.
Civilizations were to be wiped out, subjugated, or cast aside. It also had a revanchist attitude against foreigners and notions of imperial revival and reclamation of lost territory, etc. And this failed spectacularly as the Imperium fell in the civil war of the Horus Heresy, where the noble warriors of civilization were now tearing it apart and put the Emperor into the Stephen Hawking position, but without a text-to-speech device. I mean, could you imagine? In fact, the 40K era of the Empire is different and less xenophobic by necessity. Gulliman was revived with the help of the Eldar, and the Tau have established diplomatic relations with the Imperium. The chauvinism of the founding Imperium turned out to be wrong, and collaborating with other civilizations against the raging of chaos that threatens them all is much more effective. But the older Imperium insisted on the great march of our civilization mentality by getting high up on supremacist ideals. The Imperium of Man...
Also, a lot of these things didn't exist during 30K. Like, the Eldar existed, but they weren't like a thing, really. The Tau didn't exist. Could still talk and live his life. I mean, yeah, it's just a shitty joke. But like, I'm trying to figure out why the collapse thing manners into Horus heresy, because is he trying to say that Horus was like super progressive and that's why they fought a civil war. And there's not like other narrative reasons, like the emperor lying to his sons about like they're actually being gods and shit.
And was an incredibly idealist political project for humanity, seeking to embody a vision of a rationalist humanist utopia under the emperor's guidance. Free from dogmatism, except for the imperial truth. Free from holy wars, except for a great crusade. And free to pursue knowledge, except for the psychic phenomenon. Hypocrisy aside, the very failure of the atheist, modernist, and humanist version of the Imperium, and the rise of a religious cult surrounding the leader as the backdrop of the entire setting, is at the core of what the Imperium and Warhammer as a whole is. Which is not fascism. I repeat, it's not fascism. Now I get where the misconception comes from. They're genocidal authoritarians who literally worship their government. I guess it looks sus to the average normie. And it's definitely sus, but way beyond anything popular political discourse is able to analyze. Now I don't want to sound like a pretentious twat, but that's because most people have the political vocabulary of like 5 words. And I have no doubt that many of the people in the creative team at Games Workshop actually think.
We've talked about this. There's a whole video on the channel of us watching Arch Warhammer's video and talking about how it is explicitly fascist on purpose. What came before the Imperium No, he's talking about the Great Crusades, like 30k Warhammer specifically. Not like before Imperium.
They're being big brain boys, parroting fascism, and sticking up to those right-wingers, when they actually depicted something else entirely. Just like the big brain boys behind the Fallout Amazon show think that they're criticizing capitalism in that scene with Mr. House, when they actually perfectly depicted the anti-capitalist managerial revolution described by James Burnham, the paleo-conservative thinker. My point is, a lot of these people have no...
Hold on. So they're not anti-capitalist, but they made a talking point shared by an anti-capitalist dude? Okay.
No clue what they're doing when they shove politics into their stories. However, Games Workshop does have people with interesting and respectable insights, however. Like I said, it's a massive collaborative effort, and many are immensely praiseworthy in what they accomplished as creative talent. But regardless, the Imperium is actually much worse than fascism. Answer me this. Are the ancient Romans fascist?
So it's not fascist, it's just much worse than fascist. Wouldn't that apply? Yes, Fallout is anti-capitalist, but he doesn't... No, it's not. It's a story about war, guys. War never changes. Also, by the way, the defense of it's not fascist, it's actually worse than fascist, that would mean that it falls under the fascist umbrella, right? Does it, like... Wouldn't that still apply?
What about the ancient Assyrians? The Mongolians? What about the Aztecs? My point is, genocidal authoritarian societies are a dime a dozen in human history, and 40k is a commentary on the entirety of that history. It's why we have space Vikings.
So if it's all of the authoritarian regimes, which includes the fascist ones, wouldn't that make it fascist? At least, like, Arch complained about it not being fascist by, like, just avoiding the points. But you're just like, the point is hitting you in the face, and you're just not acknowledging it?
Fascist
or saying it's not. Trust me, bro.
It goes way beyond what the Italians did for a couple of decades in the 20th century. The Imperium of Man is an amalgamation of the most...
They're not fascist. They're just 10 times worse than the fascists. What is the argument there?
brutal, over-the-top elements of human history. The Roman imperial cult that worships the emperor, the brutal factory conditions from Victorian England, and the constant stream of thousands of human sacrifices to keep the universe going from the Aztecs. Not to mention World War I trench warfare fighting with the Krieg Corps and the Katakan Space Vietnam, etc. But it takes most of its inspiration from the Middle Ages. The Imperium of Man in 40k era is actually a postmodern neo-medieval state. The Imperium is a goth emo version of the Holy Roman Empire on several levels of shrooms and steroids, down to the emperor being mostly a figurehead presiding over a loosely connected federation of several planets, all with their own governments, cultures, and traditions. The state itself is ruled by several competing institutions that are all autonomous from each other, but united under a single central figure, who doesn't really run anything. Not in the modern sense anyway. It's a classic case of medievalism, but a grim dark version of it. Just because something is authoritarian and xenophobic.
So something can be... multiple things can be true at once. We talked about this in the Arch video. The worst thing than fascism is simple. It's liberalism. Yeah. Empire of Man. Imperium is Rome. Yeah, kind of.
And violent doesn't make it fascist, since these things, again, like I've said, have been around forever. My point is that a kaleidoscope of overlapping organizations and autonomous diverse regions with several different identities is not what Mussolini had in mind when he founded fascism.
So, but they still have a dictator. This is like the thing Arch talked about, is like there's no dictator, but like Gilliman comes back and he murders half the leaders with no repercussions and no checks and balances. That sounds like a dictatorship, at least at some level. Like you could say they're all individually governed. Sure, yes. But if Gilliman shows up on any single imperial world and tells them what the fuck to do, guess what? It's gonna happen. You know? Like, they're not gonna say no. Even if there is no single head. I mean, yeah, even with like the High Lords of Terra, it's like an oligarchical fascism, but like, that's not even true in 40k now, because we have Gilliman and the Lion. And the Emperor still talks, just not very often. Just because it's slow doesn't mean it's not fascist.
And Giovanni Gentili in their essay book called The Doctrine of Fascism. I get more into it in my video, It's Not Fascism, Bro. But for the sake of time...
You made one too? Damn, I'm not watching that though.
I had to cut off the part where I explain why Warhammer 40k isn't fascist, so I'm a little obliged to get into it here, but I won't go nearly as deep. But on screen now are the 5 main...
Fascism is 5 key principles.
Points in the Doctrine of Fascism. Those are me paraphrasing.
According to who, though? Like, what is the source of this? Of a new man for a new century, single party rule, power of the state, uniformity, nothing outside the state. So, like, even if we go by this, a new man for a new century, the whole point of the Imperium is to dominate the galaxy for the sake of humanity, so that nothing else can exist. Single party rule. I guess you could say that the Mechanicus and the Inquisitors are like different parties, but they're not like politically different. They all align in the same authoritarian, genocidal goals of the Imperium. So that's kind of, it's more nebulous, I'll give you that, but it's like, it's not like it's incorrect. Power of the state. The state has incredible power. We just talked about Gilliman rolls up to your planet and he tells you what to do. It's gonna happen. The state has absolute power. Inquisitors will show up and nuke entire planets just because they feel like it. How does that not imply power of the state? It's not like the people can overturn the government. When they do, guess what happens? Space Marines land and they murder everyone. That's not like, it's not mob rule. Uniformity, well, there's an imperial cult, so there you go. And nothing outside the state. Yes, if anything else, the state is literally for the emperor. If you're not doing what the Imperium wants you to do, if you're outside the bounds of the cult, you get purged. You're labeled as a heretic and you're purged. All 5 of these things, like the single party thing is like the most nebulous one here, but all 5 of these things apply to the Imperium. Like, come on.
But on screen now are the 5 main points in the Doctrine of Fascism. Those are me paraphrasing, but you can go read it yourself to check if I'm being accurate. But basically, it's the creation of a new man for a new era. A single party rule by only one political authority with totalitarian control over everything. No diversity is allowed, and the state is the mystical supersoul of the people. But one point many forget is the relentless march of history towards the future where humanity reaches ever greater heights. Which means that fascism is progressive. Yes.
Okay. So, like, humanity still wants to dominate the galaxy to make it a better galaxy for humanity. Just because they're not doing, like, fascism doesn't make, fascism is when progressive. No, that's not how that works. They're still progressing towards a better future for humanity, and to do that, in their viewpoint, they have to genocide the galaxy.
You heard that right. Again, I need to make this clear. Progressive in political theory means the belief that history never stands still or never moves backwards, and always looks to the future. It can be a right-wing thing or a left-wing thing. Californian types don't have a monopoly on the term. I remember my feminist left-wing professor back in the UK telling me with no uncertain terms, fascism is progressive, when I was doing my master's, and she was herself a progressive. So I'm not making this stuff up for political ideological purposes.
Trust me, bro.
This is a typical position to take in academia.
Fascism sees wars progress until there is no other state to be. Well, yeah, like the progress is eliminating everything that isn't the Imperium off the board.
My point is the true nature of fascism clearly does not apply to the 40k Imperium. They're objectively anti-progress and is extremely diverse in culture and government types, which is not tolerated in fascism.
I mean, like, they're diverse in, like, their government types and stuff, sure, but that doesn't mean it's not totalitarian. There are still upper powers that control everything. Just because they're not specifically mandating everything at every single moment doesn't mean that that's not true.
However, there's a very good argument to be made for the Imperium of Man being fascistic in the 30k era, when the Emperor was still around, since 5 principles are arguably somewhat fulfilled on some level, and has a lot of the same philosophical ideas of using the state to make a new type of super psycher man, and the state being the manifestation of a collective humanity, and to serve the state is to serve humanity, as the state molds the people, while the people don't
This is still true in 40k.
really mold the state, etc. So yeah, it's almost fascistic,
Yeah, they're not
except
one-to-one
for
with
one
the
thing.
1940s.
Fascism is mystical and anti-materialist in its philosophy, believing the state to be the spirit of the people, while the whole point of the Imperium was to be a materialist project that abhorred any mystical ideas. The lore does glorify the Emperor and his vision by making him an avatar of the Enlightenment in a way. He's inspired by the enlightened despot, which is a real thing in history. But he's worse because they were for religious freedom, which the Emperor was not. In the end, the 30k Imperium is also a mix of a bunch of historical stuff in one giant amalgamation to comment on human history. Only it's more totalitarian and centralized than the 40k era, which is more decentralized. Again, we should not see the entirety of human political history only through 2 decades of the 20th century. I feel obliged to repeat myself constantly in an attempt to maintain clarity in such controversial topics. Upon reflecting on the political and historical commentary of
There's
this
no bias
franchise,
here, guys. He's telling us that he doesn't have a bias.
I concluded that the whole point of Warhammer is to be satire of science fiction more than anything else. Because when you look at a lot of sci-fi, most fictional worlds are actually quite dystopian when you look under the surface. Some are even insanely grimdark by accident, but few in the audience notice just how dystopian it is, even if they're aware of some of it. The robot stories of Isaac Asimov are about how human science results in the creation of an artificial but sentient slave caste that needs to be constantly controlled through constant lobotomy and executions of deviants. In Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey, humanity was uplifted by a mysterious alien intelligence that plans to destroy it in the future. And even children's stories are insanely grimdark, like Ender's Game, where humanity brainwashes child soldiers to commit xenocide. It's the original Zeely sequence, and that fictional universe is 10 times worse than Warhammer 40k. And
It's not. Are you telling me that 40k is not? Warhammer does all of these things. Warhammer rips off the darkest aspects of every sci-fi story to ever exist. Are you saying that Warhammer is not grimdark?
even highly progressive utopian visions meant to be portrayed as an absolute jolly time for humanity is actually just as dystopian as anything else, and made worse by its unbearable hypocrisy. Like the novel and film called Things to Come by H.G. Wells, where a technocratic scientific society takes over the world, undoing silly old traditions, and brings an unceasing, unprecedented era of progress, where humanity will conquer the stars. There's only one problem. In the end, it's just another highly doctrinal society, complete with an equivalent priest class, where people walk around in fancy robes, and the leadership of this society is actually a hereditary monarchy run by a family called, and I shit you not, Cabal. Cabal is their family name. Just why? You know what they say, one man's paradise is another man's retarded power fantasy with zero self-awareness. This is why jocks beating up nerds in school is actually a national service. And I say that as a nerd. Maybe if I'd been bullied more, I'd be able to have a relationship that lasts more than a few years. Anyway, it's disconcerting how most science fiction
Damn. Bro is sad.
stories depict disturbing futures for humanity, and a lot of the times, those issues are a natural result of trying to interpret human society through
So, like, this is a very, very different thing, but like we talked about when we were doing Andy Pants Gears of War review, there's so much footage of like 40k stuff out there that you could easily fill a 37-minute video with backdrop footage from like different cinematic trailers or just Space Marine 2. But like the fact that like half of the background footage in this is just like a 40k AI thing. It even says down there in the corner, 40k AI. Why? And like he's just reusing the Age of Sigmar 4th edition drop trailer again and again and again. which Age of Sigmar has nothing to do with anything he's talking about here. It's I don't know, it's just fucking odd.
Merely a scientific and technological perspective, but it leads to an AI creating a rogue Black Ops organization that controls everyone in the shadows while they think they live in a progressive paradise, which is literally what happened in Star Trek, by the way. The United Federation democracy is a lie! Space CIA runs the show! 40K was making fun of this by making the modernist rationalist Imperium of man just collapse into a never-ending Middle Ages. It's actually really deep, bro. And in the end, the Imperium is run by the Inquisition since it has no oversight or restrictions on its power. Just like Section 31 in Star Trek. These two models of galactic...
The Inquisitors don't have any overlap, but they definitely have limits. Technically, yes, an Inquisitor could go up to Gilliman and say, hey man, I think you're a traitor. I'm going to arrest you. And Gilliman would slap him so hard that the skin leaves his bones. There are still... like, it's not... like, they're not unilaterally strong like that, you know? It's not exactly the same as he's describing it here with the Star Trek comparison. It doesn't work like that in 40K.
Galactic civilization have more in common than you'd think, so it all comes full circle, and it's interesting.
I know for a fact he's wrong about Star Trek lore because he's watching new Star Trek, which a lot of the fandom... I don't know anything about Star Trek. I know it's like a sci-fi utopia type thing, and I know Spock. That's about it. So I couldn't tell you.
Interesting. I might get into it in another video. Some fans think that 40K is a satire on religion and traditionalism because of all the religious lunatics in the setting, but I think they're wrong. Or if that was the intended satire, it failed spectacularly. The religious lunacy is only a thing 40,000 years in the future precisely because progressivism and the Enlightenment failed.
So, the religious over-the-top thing of the Imperial cult where if you have the wrong thought, they'll murder you, isn't satire because you don't agree with it. Okay.
Failed so monumentally. So let's reiterate everything that happens in the lore one more time. A technologically obsessed, scientifically oriented progressive humanity created a technology it couldn't control in artificial intelligence, which almost destroyed it. Rationalist atheist humanism wasn't enough to satisfy and guide human civilization who needed to return to religion. The progressive Tao who challenged the Imperium are slowly starting to become more like the Imperium the more they interact with the hostile and paranormal forces of the universe. And the free-loving, sexually open society of the Eldar literally summoned a demon that destroyed their galactic civilization, and they are on their way to extinction. You can't...
Also, to reiterate, the Eldar didn't just have transgender surgeries when Slaanesh was born. They had... I'm getting fucking hair in my mouth. They had entire planet-wide orgies with rivers of wine and mountains of Oreos, and that is what summoned Slaanesh for hundreds of years. It's not just that they were sexually expressive. I guarantee you, on Imperial pleasure worlds, when you have like the elite class, they still have orgies. They're just not doing... He's just reworking how the lore in 40K works. Yeah, like a lot of it is like, it's not like wrong, but it's not right either. Like, you have to really, really, really constrict the way these things are portrayed in 40K to get this viewpoint across.
Have a satire of tradition placed in humanity's future, because that only occurs if progress failed first, thus ruining the satire. You need to place it in the past, like Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. That's the real satire of tradition, and it's boring, and no one...
So... the satire doesn't work because in the future, because the future is supposed to be progressive. Unless it's grimdark, which 40K is, which never had a progressive thing to begin with, which it still is, because it's fascist, and that is progressive in a way that they want to, create a one single ethno-state for humanity. I don't even know if that's technically an ethno-state. No, you can't just say, I disagree with this, so therefore it's wrong. I mean, if you had a better argument, but I don't think that argument tracks whatsoever. Who's more hated by the British? Yeah.
No one reads it anymore except my really pretentious friends. 40K exaggerates every aspect of humanity and civilization to ridiculous proportions, from militant atheism to religious fundamentalism, and it does so by making fun of the effects of science and technology. Because science and tech increases human power but not human wisdom. So 40K envisions how tech enlarges every silly aspect of human civilization, not solving the problems, just making them bigger. That's why humanity is forced to stop developing technologically in the first place to avoid self-destruction. Which it has a point. Think about it. Has all our technology really solved hunger, disease, war, death? Or just made them into existential threats?
It has solved them. It's the people, not the technology. And that also applies to 40K.
Entire species. Now we can make unstoppable bioweapons and war can glass the entire planet. Yeah, some diseases like cholera were wiped out, but there's new ones. And although Fritz Haber saved us all from famine by synthesizing ammonia, climate change is a serious threat to the global food supply and might bring famine back in a big way. Like in Brazil, that insane flooding in the south ruined rice crops, which will increase the risk of starvation. Not to mention that both male and female fertility are declining at an alarming rate, with the diminishing health of sperm and ovaries, for reasons we don't understand. At this rate, it's only a matter of time before we mess with something we won't be able to handle, which is why the science-loving emperor of mankind who praises the gaining of knowledge is a liar who limited human knowledge of the nature of the warp, precisely because limits have to be placed on this thing. So basing your civilization on the unrestrained progressive pursuit.
We don't really know anything about why the emperor didn't tell his sons or the greater Imperium about anything. It's more so that he's just kind of like a dick and a bad father. And he's just like, God works in mysterious ways. Like, it's like that kind of thing. It's not that, like, he thinks that new technology is bad, therefore he restricts it. That's not what? He was ambitious as all hell. Things only stagnate after him. Because he wants ideal humanity. Yeah. He didn't like humanity in 30K. He planned to get rid of most of the Astartes and things like that.
Pursuit of knowledge just makes you a silly Billy in this universe. 40K also shows the flaws of the progressive assumption by showing how technological progress can make humanity move backwards in terms of social progress, by making knights in armor feasible again as a military asset, which makes modern universal suffrage and democracy unworkable. There's a reason why it only happened in our world with the advent of the musket, which is why the Techno Knights of the Space Marines are the most visible part of the franchise. They're a symbol of technologically reviving historical relics and how technological progress can cause apparent social regression.
No, they're the most visible because they're the coolest and they're the protagonists. It's not really that much more complex, to be just like him. Well, yeah.
Because although social progress is possible to a degree via a lot of effort and sacrifice, you're limited by your historical conditions. It's for insights like this, in the setting of 40K, that people feel in a prime level that makes us enjoy it, despite most not wanting to live in this fucked up setting, and despite it being a rather unflattering depiction of humanity as a whole. Because the Imperium of man faces the darkness of the universe head on, and we see the heroism necessary to do so. Which is cool. It's more appealing than nerds walking around in color-coded pajamas rambling about shield percentages, and eating poop scientifically magicked into food. I like Star Trek, by the way. And I watch...
The Imperium eats dead people, and presumably also their shit. I don't... I know it's a joke, but come on.
It often. But I also enjoy making fun of it. The Klingons are the good guys, by the way. Anyway, if there's any point to 40K beyond pew 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 toy soldiers, then it's a contemplation on how bad things can get, especially after the failure of lofty utopian ideals. Which is interesting because the two most similar countries to the Imperium of man that exist in the world today are Russia and China, both of which are failed projects of progressive movements that...
They're most similar to Russia and China. But they're not fascist.
promise to explore new and improved horizons for human society. Current China especially, because it was founded by a progressive militant atheist who persecuted religion and did his best to wipe it out.
The emperor didn't persecute religion, he just didn't tell people about the warp. I guess you could say modern 40K persecuted religion in that they hid all knowledge of the warp and killed people who knew about it until of course the Great Rift, and then now they kind of can't ignore it. But the emperor didn't really do that.
only for him to be deified and worshipped. Check out the fiasco that was Mao's Mongol cult, or this massive golden statue of him built on a literal golden throne. You just can't make this shit up. It was removed because it was too much even for the Chinese government. But that doesn't stop the increasing amount of temples growing in the countryside that worship Mao as a god. And it's not just uneducated country folk, but also generals and officials, leftist scholars. It was starting to seriously freak out even the communist government, who was telling people to calm down on the zealotry. Or they were in 2015. Things may have changed since then. I've seen reports of the government low-key encouraging Mao worship now. North Korea is of course an example of a regime that totally embraces this deification, but this is just one aspect. When you look at China with its cheapness of human life, the terrible working conditions, with high death rates, the censorship, and the countless souls of industrial workers forced to feed the machine of a highly bureaucratic and inefficient empire, as well as the unbearable polluted air and the smog-covered sky, etc., you realize they're just LARPing as Victorian England. So much for the workers' paradise. The Foxconn suicide nets, by the way, in China are literally the most 40k shit you can ever see. China is the closest thing to the Imperium of man in the real world, which is ironic, considering the Tao faction are obviously Chinese coded, but they're more like Space Singapore, I'd say. The Russians have a similar thing going on, where they were once a lofty, expansionist, progressive atheist empire, operating under materialist doctrine, but there was a collapse of the central authority, and now their declining empire is sending countless people, including convicted criminals, off to die for the empire, even using obsolete and decrepit military equipment from a bygone era, with the nukes, missiles, and submarines now being blessed by priests of the now official state church. Some of these pictures are the most 40k images you'll ever see of real life, and they just don't end. There's countless pictures of this. It's gotten so bad that the Orthodox Church had to issue an order for priests to stop blessing weapons of mass destruction. I feel bad for my Orthodox brothers, actually, because corrupt government forces are trying to co-opt their beautiful spirituality for things that aren't very Christian. So please don't think I'm criticizing the Orthodox Church here. I'm not. I'm trying to point out the current state of the Russian government, which still venerates the Soviet atheist leaders like Lenin and Stalin, who initiated brutal persecution of religion in Russia. This weird syncretism with atheist militant progressives and traditional religion gives the whole place a 40k feel to it. The anti-progressive view of human history within 40k is absolutely crucial to its appeal across the board regardless of one's politics. Extremists from both the left and the right tend to love it even when the lore portrays both sets of values as misguided. But it's still appealing to everyone because 40k is about raging against the dark and that defiant and noble spirit that stands firm to the very end. It's also a cathartic way to express the decline of civilization and the changing of an era, which everyone is feeling right now, especially since 2020.
He's just sort of continuing to describe 40k.
Regardless if they admit it or not. But I think its main appeal is how refreshing it is as a major franchise with a different perspective inherent to the setting that is distinct from the typical triumphalism of the current year. For now, anyway. The ESG money ruins everything. The danger of forcing a specific kind of progressive ideology to dictate every major piece of culture risks turning everything into this one blob where everything looks the same. Do we really need 40k to be yet another Marvel or Star Wars?
What about 40k as Star Wars? Fema Custodes is not... Okay.
You make Warhammer lose its edge and mired by current year politics in a way that makes the characters and entire factions behave in a way that really doesn't make sense for the logic of the setting, then it won't be the thing that made it so popular in the first place, now would it? I myself am a Star Wars refugee. I was really into the Star Wars Expanded Universe back in college until it became a crappier, less well-written version of Marvel after Disney. And I know there's tons like me. The growing success of 40k over the years is directly correlated to Disney's mishandling of Star Wars, which was never...
What? Are you saying... What? You say that... Warhammer woke because Star Wars woke? Woke is when Star Wars?
A grim, dark reflection of human civilization, but it was...
By the way, while making another tunnel, glad to be there. By the way, some of the best Star Wars projects have come out of the Disney era. Like, the Jedi games are fantastic. That last season of Clone Wars was great. Whatever the Ahsoka arc. But, like, the Bad Batch, all 3 seasons of that was great. I mean, you could say the movies kind of sucked. I like Force Awakens and Last Jedi. Probably my greatest hot take, Star Wars-wise. I really like The Last Jedi, and I fucking hate Rise of Skywalker for just saying, we're not going to do anything that this movie set up. Because they were just cowards about it. But like some of the best Star Wars stuff has come out of like the last few years, like The Mandalorian. You had a photo of it up earlier, like because of the sequel trilogy. Exactly. Like I mean, like The Acolyte. I didn't hear anything good about that. I didn't hear anything great necessarily about Ahsoka, but it's not like they're awful. It was great, but for the Ahsoka, yeah, like. That's the thing with like Marvel stuff and Star Wars stuff too, is that like even the stuff that's like bad, like the Kenobi show, like it's not awful, it's not horrendous, it's not like the it's not like a Tommy Wiseau film, it's just like mid. And with something like Star Wars, like when you're expecting greatness every time and you get something that's mid, it makes it feel a lot worse. And that's the same with like Marvel. Like the Marvel movies, the newer ones especially, like I recently rewatched the new Doctor Strange movie. And like it's not necessarily great and it's not like perfect or it's not like super amazing, fantastic by like any means. It's kind of just like it's mid, it's all right. Like it's not a bad time. It's just not like super anything special. And people see that and they're like, this isn't Infinity War. This is dog water. And it's like, come on. There's a difference between like absolute trash and something that's just mid. But for now, people's like mid has become dog water. Going back to the old movies and questioning the quality, you don't even have to question it. People were shitting on Phantom Menace in 1999. Like those movies have been bad. And even like the OG trilogy, like Return of the Jedi, I think is like probably, I think Return of the Jedi is worse than either Force Awakens or The Last Jedi narratively, or not narratively, but like as a movie. That movie makes me want to fall asleep every time I'm watching it. I think with me and my fiance, I made them watch the Star Wars movies with me. I think we skipped that one because I was like, I don't really care about this. Have I taken a break? No. I always eat dinner right before we start streaming, so I'm pretty all right.
It wasn't a mere product of entertainment either. It was King Arthur in space, with all the legacy that entails. 40K, as it is now, unwittingly captured a similar feeling of the eternal story like Star Wars did, by portraying civilization as an ever-repeating cycle, just like Dune before it. By portraying medievalism in space, it becomes an Arthurian story by default. And it does so by questioning the 4 assumptions of a progressive view of history. Here are the false assumptions. 1. The universe is inherently stable enough to guarantee progress forever. This is more the left-wing assumption of a necessarily benign universe, where the arc of history all but guarantees it, and we're typically progressing to a utopia of some kind. We're naturally evolving and nature is guiding the way. However, in truth, evolution doesn't lead to guaranteed development, but adaptation, which is not the same. You can increase in intelligence or lose intelligence, or stagnate, depending on the conditions. Like the Wall-E people, comfortable conditions cause decline. Also, entropy is inevitable, which will cause collapse that sets progress back. Which leads to the second assumption, that the chaos of entropy and conflict are what guarantees progress. Evolution through the eternal struggle to life. This is more the right-wing view. War as the great purifier. But in truth, too much chaos destroys everything, and it's more than likely that you'll eventually be destroyed by something bigger in this scenario. Eventually. Until entropy consumes everything.
That is the truth of 40K, though. The truth of 40K is that the Imperium is like one wrong move and the Imperium dies.
Universe, making your development and struggles pointless, ultimately. Third assumption. Tradition is the enemy of progress. Untrue. Progress doesn't come from dismantling the past and resetting everything. That just makes you reinvent the wheel like an idiot. Or reinvent slavery, like what the Soviets did with labor camps, as opposed to moving beyond slavery, like the British monarchy did. True progress comes from building on the foundation that came before. Tradition just means the transfer of customs and ideas through the generations. Progressivism itself is a tradition of thought. If your tradition is to question and dismantle tradition, you won't progress, you'll destroy yourself in cognitive dissonance when your descendants obey the spirit of that idea by dismantling what came before, which means dismantling the idea of progress, which is what happened with postmodernism. Fourth assumption, embrace change. Newer is always better. Silly, of course. Not all change is good. You need to differentiate between what is progress and what is degeneration. Traditional knowledge becomes a great way to do that, because if a tradition was effective enough to last this long, it must know a thing or two about a...
I wouldn't say that a lot of traditions from the past have lasted so long because they are just inherently better or they're wise. I would say certain traditions, like, Christianity, lasted so long because they dominated, colonized, and viciously forced other people to believe in the same things they believed, so therefore it continued. Not because it's not like they brought Christianity to Native Americans and Native Americans were like, oh, that makes so much sense, dude. We're totally on board. We love this. That's not how it worked at all. They came over, they said, hey, you're gonna sit here, read this book, and you're gonna believe this book, or we're gonna fucking feed you to the wolves. Like, it's not. That could be true. I don't know too much about Judaism, but like, it's a really like like presupposed like this wisdom onto something that is not like the fact that it's still alive is it's not still here because of its wisdom. It's here because it killed everything it was competing with, and all of the other cultures and stuff that could have also made it to this era of time.
Avoiding ideas or habits that would cause it to degenerate and die off. Progress through tradition. We progress by trying to live up to the eternal ideals instead of changing ideals because of dumb young people in universities who think they know better. The Warhammer 40k universe is a franchise that explores these 4 assumptions in the lore, and the story elements are
not a cultural video, but like, let me talk about how universities are indoctrinating people into leftist ideals.
Are narrative ways to express anguish at our own grimdark universe. In 40k, the warp will eventually engulf everything and destroy all life. It's pretty much a given. This is akin to the aforementioned heat death of the universe. But there is hope in 40k in the form of faith. The Emperor's faith in a vision he saw for humanity, and the faith that the Emperor will return. Or the Eldari, with their faith in one of their gods. Yeah. It's the faith in divine intervention, basically. A transcendent power that defends the existence of life. Whether or not this faith is well-founded, 40k doesn't answer that. But it does answer that this faith is absolutely necessary to fuel civilization in a bleak universe. Now, it's important to note that progress does exist, but it's only one part of the cycle that happens before decline. Progress only occurs via great sacrifice, and it can be easily lost without proper vigilance. History moves forwards, and also moves back.
I don't know, maybe it's just me, but all of like the AI generated stuff, 40k looks so much lamer than actual 40k art. Even though it's like animated and everything, the actual 40k art just goes so much harder.
Which is why the progressive types are only partly correct. However, I believe that history also moves upwards, while it moves forward and backwards, essentially being a three-dimensional spiral, motherfucker. I'm not on drugs, I swear. My point is, as the cycle of history keeps going through the eras, it does tend to progress higher than previous eras, but they also tend to collapse more catastrophically as well. And the same story of empires rising and falling seems to be told over and over, again and again, in a larger scale, but with the same archetypes repeating themselves over and over. Here's the grand narrative of civilization. The people used to live in the good times, in a golden age. Then things get bad as a tyrant takes over and oppresses the people in poverty and deprivation. Then comes a great leader that founds a new era. Then the people in this new golden era sin against the heavenly order, and they fall under the sway of a mad tyrant again, and are back into poverty and oppression, until a new great leader comes along, sets them free, and the cycle goes on and on. You see this cycle in several mythologies and religious narratives, and in the Bible, but especially in the book of Judges. And this is the grand narrative that repeats itself over and over in Warhammer lore, with Guilliman being the latest iteration of the great leader.
I guess. Yeah. A lot of empires were collapsed because like there's just this clash of conservatism and progressivism that just doesn't mesh well. Normally because your leading class is traditionalist. So therefore when you have a younger or newer progressive class at the bottom that try to make changes, that leading class will grip on even tighter and literally hold on to the bitter end. But like the Imperium didn't like collapse and then like be reborn by Guilliman and then it's like going to collapse again. Guilliman is still a part of the same empire that was there in 30k. Like it's worse kind of, but like I don't know how that, I feel like it doesn't really point.
coming to the rescue for his people. This is also the story of the Book of Revelations, where the cycle is believed to play out for the very last time before the final end of history. It's the cycle of civilization, and it first played out with just a few cities in the Middle East. With
I think he's just like describing. It's like a really weird thing where he's just kind of like describing media literacy, but like using it as like absolute truths instead of just places where Warhammer takes its inspiration from. Which is, I don't know, it's I don't know how it factors in exactly.
of Akkad and whatnot, to now involving the entire planet. Having this cycle continue out into space on a galactic scale seems only natural, which is why the space opera genre seems so reactionary, with empires and monarchs and mystics being an internal aspect to civilization that just repeats itself over and over again. And this started with Isaac Asimov in his Foundation series, which is what inspired the entire genre. And Asimov was a very creative and progressive thinker, but even he had trouble imagining a way out of the cycle. But that's a topic for another time. And with that, I'd like to thank you, my patrons. You're the bulwark that keeps chaos from consuming this channel into oblivion. And thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.
All those nights I wish you'd stay.
That caught me off guard. Because they're indoctrinated. Yeah, I mean, like, the cult is very, very strong in 40k. Hold on, I knocked my PS5 off its stand. Let's look at this, because I saw this before we started. Address some common repeated comments. I addressed the satire aspect of 40k in the video. It fails at satirizing and what it succeeds in satirizing. The satirical aspect of the setting doesn't change the nature of the setting itself, which is one where progress failed. Also, not every novel or contribution to the lore is satire, especially since the Imperium of Man is getting increasingly more heroic in its portrayal. They do a pretty... like the whole point is that a lot of the books and stuff are from the lens of, like the Imperium itself. Hold on. Bring this up so you can actually read it. Starship Troopers, the movie, is not satire. It's slander, because Paul Verhoeven didn't get past the second chapter before deciding to portray the Federation as fascist, because dude got triggered at a different political perspective in the novel. So it's not satire. That's not how that works. It's not. That's not how. Just because. First of all, he had an understanding of what the book is. Like, he didn't read it himself, but like, come on. Are you telling me you've gone through and you've read every single last 40k book, codex, and every single entry to ever exist ever to get to the viewpoints you have in this video? Sorry, but I don't agree with that, because I would say your video is slander because you didn't read every single last one of them. That's not how that works. It's still satire. It's satire of... Yeah, it is a satire of like a Darwinistic kind of thing. It's like meritocracy to a gross extent. People get triggered by the lore in 40k to retcon and change the lore, which then triggers the lore purists who complain back. The original triggered, make fun of the purists for getting triggered, and down the spiral of mutual triggering we go. The pressure to add more female Space Marines used to be more of a fringe thing before becoming mainstream. There wasn't even pressure to do that. They just had female Space Marines. And then they got rid of them to pander towards a male audience. That's just incorrect. And like, what are people getting triggered by in 40k? Who's triggered about 40k? Come on. Let's be real here. Who is triggered by 40k? People know that it's like grimdark. It's not. It's just not a. It's not a thing that's happening. So the Starship Troop. This is just wrong. This is just not Like, you could disagree with it as, like, its effectiveness of satire or whatever, but you can't just say it's not satire because you don't agree with it. And this satire thing, this one in the video also didn't make much sense, because it's your argument is it's not satire because I don't agree that it qualifies to be satire. So in order for it to not be satire, somebody has to be coming at it with your specific, people who know nothing about 40K will probably be disgusted by it, but that's more like gore porn, The only people triggered by 40K are conservatives when they see a woman. Yeah. The only people I've seen get triggered over 40K was like Synthetic Man throwing a fit that there was a black person in his video game, or that there was a woman who he considers ugly in his video game. And it's like a gaslighting of like the opposite of like the Helldivers effect, where people would like kind of almost too much go like, hey, Helldivers are the bad guys. Like, you should know they're the bad guys. And then you'll get people being like, we know they're the bad guys. We just like Demuncula. Yeah. The other side to be like, we know they're the bad guys. We're just doing it for fun. It's like, okay. And then like, this is like the other side of this where it's like, 40K sucks. You don't want to be in 40K. And then the other side is like, yes, we know. Doesn't mean like you can't criticize it. Like, what? So this is not a good... I like this because it's a semi-halfway decent thing of saying... yeah, lesser evil is stupid. But like, this is like a halfway there point of being like, you can't just reverse engineer it because everything was like handmade and like put together like by hand. First of all, doesn't apply to Warhammer because a lot of their tech that even they say they can't make anymore was mass produced. Terminator armor. There's a fuckload of Terminator armor. Not every single one of those suits was personally handmade with like the really specific nuts and bolts that are specific to those each and every individual suit. It was definitely mass produced at some scale. And B, sure, we can't rebuild the Saturn V rocket 1-to-1 because it was, it had a lot of very specific parts and pieces or whatever. Then we wouldn't be able to recreate exactly as it was. We have since then built even better, sturdier, stronger, and more efficient rockets. This is not the argument that like this says it is. Like, it's not, it doesn't come off in the way that I think it wants to. I'm sorry, CDR Chaos, but like, that's not really an argument. If the argument is you can't redo it, like, we don't even know how to recreate the Saturn V rocket. It's like, okay, we have built better rockets since then. So we don't need to rebuild the Saturn V. We have even better technology now. It's not really like it just doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. But anyways, we've been live for about 4 hours and 45 minutes now. Jesus fucking Christ. It's 2 a.m. More explaining why Gears characters are so swell. I saw that. We're not going to watch that tonight. I'm also just not that interested in it. I feel like it's not exactly going to have anything interesting to say. But that's going to be it for me tonight. Thank you very much for everyone tuning in, watching, playing Minecraft with us, doing this. If you're watching this on YouTube, come by every Saturday at 9 p.m. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've watched this to the very end, Jesus fucking Christ, what is wrong with you? But anyways, we stream every Saturday at 9 p.m. Central CST time. Something like that. I don't know. I'm fucking tired. We'll see you guys next week. Good night, everybody. Stay cool. Have fun.